you talked about being athletic, and you were, and you've talked a little bit about taking in everything and basically being taught how to do all these different aspects. What was the biggest challenge for you, though? What was the thing that if anything, that you felt like you struggled with, and where, you, that really sort of shaped, like where you had to work a little bit harder, because drum corps is a very it's physically demanding, it's mentally demanding, it's all of those things. But we're all built differently. What was your thing that you felt like was a little bit more of a struggle for you back then?
Far and away, my number one thing that I struggled with, not only from Northern Aurora Cavaliers to North Texas to finish out my college, graduate school, all those things, far and away, it's the same thing, George. And that is the ability to adopt a very, very different style and approach to hitting the drum. And so the way that we approached the drum in Northern Aurora was a certain way. Getting to Cavaliers, as you remember, it was very, very clear what that system was, which muscle groupings were used to play check patterns, and how we approached diddles and everything. Just the psychology of drumming about the Cavalier experience was different from Northern Aurora. And then, and super glad that I had that experience, of course. And then finals night for me in 1989. Do you remember when in those days drum corps, when different drum corps placed below you, they would turn and face the people that were left on the field at retreat? So I remember, because as you may have picked up on, I'm not the tallest guy in the world. I was on the very left end of the snare line. And so Mr. Scott Kretzer, our section leader, allowed us to turn to the left, and there's the Blue Devils. And they played the opening chunk from their opener, You Gotta Try, I think is what it was in 89. And the smoothness and the way that they approached the drum was something that was incredibly attractive to me. So I introduced myself to a whole bunch of those guys after the show that night. And I asked, where do you guys all go to school? And almost in unison, what did they say?
North Texas, yeah.
North Texas.
Yeah.
So I finished up my time. I was going to Michigan State University at that time, very strong drum line, but the studio was still developing. So I transferred from Michigan State University to the University of North Texas, and to George's point, to chase that next level of adaptation for my own playing.
Oh. Let me ask you a question. I mean, who knows if you were thinking about this back then, but since it was a challenge for you in terms of like, basically being told play this way, then play this way, then do this and do that. Did you ever stop to think why they were having you, like, was there a logic behind it? Was it just the way they wanted it to be, or did it actually like what guided that for them? And maybe now as looking back, you have more of insight into that, but even back then, did you think about that at all?
I did. Absolutely, George. So I've always been curious, and I've always been kind of a closet pedagogue, even back as a kid. Like, why am I using this muscle? Right. I get a different sound if I add this. Wait, it's lighter now if I go to, wait a second. So does that mean, well, what if I don't have as much time to get to this? Well, how about so I've always had that kind of mentality. And so by going to Northern Aurora, by going to the Cavaliers, and then by going to North Texas, I was specifically trying to seek out different people's approaches, because they were obviously successful to different degrees of success. And I really wanted to figure out, how can I best prepare myself? Because at that point, I had already decided that I wanted to teach at the collegiate level, or maybe I wanted to teach drum corps someday, or I just wanted to be a professional player. And I wanted as much information swimming around me that I could carve out what I felt was best to equip my students to be successful in any music situation. And that's why I tried to just eat up as much as I could wherever I went.
You talk about thinking about breaking every little thing down. This is the guy right here. I mean,
it's a little bit of why. So we know somebody in common, Genevieve Hilburn, and she's the one who put us together. But Genevieve was a former student of mine, and what you're talking about is a lot of those sort of depths that we went into. If you do it this way, it sounds like this. If you do it this way, it sounds like this. But what's easier from an efficiency standpoint? What's needed? What does the music demand. Like all of these things, I feel like she sort of saw that you and I have, like we live in that place a little bit. So that's great.
And that shows, by the way, getting to know Genevieve at Texas A&M Commerce has been wonderful. She's so bright and a gifted player and so thoughtful. Yeah, I can see why she would want us to meet.
So 89, you marched Cavaliers. Did you continue with Cavaliers after that?
I did not, Rob. I saw an opportunity to start teaching a little earlier than most. And so I started teaching some drum corps in 90, 91, 92, and 93, and then would have aged out 93. I would have aged out 93. So I was able, and I was teaching the front ensemble for groups. I'm going to try another deep cut for both of you. Limited edition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You remember limited? Okay.
You're going to have to try harder.
Yeah, come on, man. Yeah. I'm waiting to hear like Quad City Nights or something like that.
Geneseo Nights. Okay. All right. So how about the Vagabonds? Butler Vagabonds?
Okay, you got me on that one.
Okay,
I
there
don't
we
think
go.
I've heard that one, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it was limited edition and had some great experiences there. I was really honored that Northern Aurora asked me to come back and help them in some winter camps. And then, ironically enough, that last year, this is 1992, 93, again, I'm at North Texas now. I just transferred. I meet a young man by the name of Jeff Prosperie.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Right. And so Jeff Prosperie is here at North Texas. I believe he was getting his master's at that point. I befriend Jeff, and there's kind of a fun story behind that whole thing too. The day that I auditioned for the drumline, I had not met Paul. I didn't know who Paul was. I just knew my teacher was Dr. Robert Shatroma. Everyone calls him Doc. And so I'm there in Michigan. Remember, as you both remember, in the 80s and the 90s, you couldn't just jump on Instagram and figure out who's teaching anywhere like that. So I remember working really hard to make an audition video for scholarship so that Dr. Shatroma would accept me in the studio. So I was fortunate to do that. So when I showed up in Denton, USA, I didn't really know many people. So Jeff Prosperie walks over to me, and I think Paul or somebody, maybe McIntosh, somebody sent Jeff to go meet me and drum with me before I went into the kind of the big audition room. And so I'll never forget what Jeff said. We're drumming together, and Jeff was asking me to play some things. I don't remember flams or rolls or something. And after a while, Jeff lets me finish the phrase, and he goes, the guys around here really don't drum like you. And I said, yes, sir. That's kind of why I'm here. And he said, did you march Cavaliers? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, yeah, that shows. He said, you're going to learn how to hit the drum very differently while you're here. So I said, okay, great. And then I went into the room, and there are 1,000 more stories that I could tell you to have you guys just howling laughing. But for the sake of this interview, I won't go into them all, but let's just say that my eyes were opened by all these great players around me.
Yeah. It's almost like, it's amazing what you can tell from somebody's hands.
Yeah.
It's just, there is so much information there about what's going on.
The look, the sound, everything. Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it. It's practically like, you don't need to tell me anything. Just start playing. Okay, I got it. Like after a couple minutes.
Just to be clear, George, Jeff was not being disparaging at all.
No, yeah.
He was just watching how I moved,
right,
and said, you've drummed in the Midwest. Let me guess, you probably marched in the Cavaliers, because he just saw my motions.
The mechanics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the thing about when you get to a level, or when you do this enough, let's just say, you can see those things and you can hear them also. You see and hear things that and I think that's one of the little pleasures of doing this so much. having it be such a big part of our lives.
I think he probably guessed, because you probably dudded through the audition.
There you go.
Okay, that's funny. That's funny, Rob. You got me there.
No, but serious, you talk about that Cavalier style at the time. I could totally picture like what those hands looked like back then. Very just like, I don't know. Yeah.
So, a lot of different things going on at that time. You're teaching. You're going to North Texas. You get this opportunity to go into the studio, songwriting, music world a little bit. It feels like a little bit of a well, what do I do? Where do I go? Or did you even look at it like that back then? Or were you like, I could do all of this?
Your point is brilliant. I'm going to tell you one story that I tell to a lot of my students. So let me back up one step and say this. When I met Jeff and I'm just learning about this drum line, and I'm meeting all these fabulous players. Gosh, I think Ricky Rodriguez and maybe even Kevin Murray was there for a bit. Of course, Dr. Brian West and Mike McIntosh and Jeff Bush, all of these famous people that I'd either read about or got to know very quickly around. Jeff Queen comes in maybe a year later, and he's fairly good at the snare drum. So we had all these brilliant players around us, right? And so I'm getting to know Jeff.
Did you march with Troy? Was Troy there at the time? Troy Hall?
Yes, sir.
So I marched with Jeff at VK. 90 and 91, and I marched with Troy at Blue Devils in 94. So
I am so sorry, George.
I have that connection.
What was your last year there at UNT? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I left in the spring of 95, Rob.
So there
Okay.
you go.
So we probably some of those guys, yeah. Some of the guys I marched with at VK, yeah.
The VK, so Keith Stevens.
Yeah, Keith. Anuj, yeah.
Anuj Thacker. He's a Colony grad. I'm about to reference Anuj's high school here in 1 second, actually. So, so Troy is a dear, dear friend of mine. What's up, Troy? Troy and I drummed together every day for many years at North Texas. Yes. And his story is really fascinating too. And it's quite inspirational. So Troy is a wonderful guy, smart musician, and has had a really unique path for sure. So while I was there getting to know Jeff Prosperie, Jeff was teaching at a high school called The Colony. And The Colony, and that's where Anuj is from, The Colony was one of many, many, many strong percussion and band programs in the state of Texas. The head band director at that time was a gentleman by the name of Dick Clardy. Well, Mr. Clardy is now like the instrumental director for all of Fort Worth ISD. I work with him now through Strive Mind as a consultant. So funny how musical circles continue to connect later in life. But at that time, I'm enjoying getting to know Jeff. Jeff pulls me aside one time. Maybe he saw something in me that he liked. And he said, I'm going to go up and I'm going to teach Phantom Regiment. I've been named the new caption head and I'm going to write the book. And I said, oh my God, that's great, Jeff. And he said, my full-time job here as the percussion director in the Colony is a big one. And I was wondering if you could maybe take over for me, maybe the last, and I don't, to this day, I can't remember if it was a week or a month. It was so that Jeff could move to Rockford early and establish things.
Because you had to back then.
Yeah. And I said, I'd love to. And so I followed him around. He said, I'd like you to shadow me for a day. And I said, oh, great. Now, keep in mind, my background is one band director in the state of Michigan, like most other states, and doing his best, right? And so here I am. I'm with Jeff. We go from middle school to high school. And the way that I experienced that day and the system that Texas has for percussion education, I will never forget in my life. It was the first time we walked into a band hall that was absolutely silent until the director spoke, and those kids snapped up in their chair and they're playing things that I didn't think a high school band could sound like. And this is one of their middle school bands. Then Jeff said, hey, follow me. I'm going to show you the beginner class. So we go into the beginner class. One of those sixth graders, by the way, was Patricia Islas. If you've ever heard of Team Islas, Doug Bush and Patricia Islas. Yep. So we went around and he turns the med on. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Prosperie. I'm like, oh my goodness, look, there's like 15 beginners. They're all at check. And he turns the metronome on at 86 beats a minute. And their little paw starts tapping and they pull out their sticks. 2, high position, go. A 1 tay, 2 tay, 3 tay, 4 tay, 1 tay. And at that point, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? No wonder Texas is so strong. You have all of these 10-year-olds getting Jeff Prosperie's information, drumming to a metronome, and they finish the exercise, jump. And he says, relax, and they go back to check. All right, who'd like to demonstrate? And then Susie raises her little hand. She plays. All right, let's talk about Susie. Robbie, what do you think? Susie's left hand was really resonant, but she tended to rush going into the downbeat. Oh, good, Robbie. What else? The level of detail being established as a beginner was something I'd never seen. So in that moment, I decided at some point I wanted to be a percussion director in Texas, which would later happen with Colleyville Heritage High School.
Wow.
Yeah, the whole Texas education system, as far as music goes, it's amazing because, you can have a degree as a percussionist and go teach and have your own percussion program, and it's not like you're you're scraping up a living. You actually have benefits and everything else. Yeah.
Can you talk about, for those of us outside of it, right, who maybe don't understand how it's set up and what guides it, describe percussion education in Texas if you can, for us outside of it.
Yes, sir. So you basically have the rest of the United States, and then you have the Texas music education machine, as I like to refer to it. Now, obviously, there are pockets around the United States that have a system by which they have modeled it after Texas. So you can think of amazing band states like Indiana and maybe Ohio and, of course, Georgia. And then you go further into that specificity, and you've got the Atlanta, the Cobb County bands. Then you go into Carmel and Avon. Oh my goodness. If you look at the way they've structured their feeder patterns in their high school and their staffing, it is typically based on a Texas model. So it's not that it doesn't exist anywhere outside of Texas. It's just that it becomes more and more rare. Hence, like I grew up in Michigan, we had one band director, and it was a big deal if someone took private lessons. In the major band programs, it's way more uncommon if one kid is not in private lessons. That's how common it is. And that's really the level of expectation. So now to kind of back into this more globally, George, it's this. When you are entering a high school band program in the state of Texas, there are varying degrees of support. But I would generally say there's at least one or two band directors at a middle school, depending on the size. And then, of course, when you get to the high school, depending on the size and the needs of the district, there might be 2 or 3 or as many as 7 in one case here in Dallas. Wow. And those band directors are all salaried. They are hired based on their skill sets and how they can serve all the bands and the feeder programs. So if I was to overgeneralize, I would say that there are typically 3 or 4 band directors. One of those band directors, and again, if you look at their W-2, it will say band director, but their day-to-day activities will be go to middle school A, teach the beginners, maybe hang out for a sectional and coach a little bit, then break over to middle school B. And now at middle school B, I teach this class of beginners like Jeff Prosperie did in 1993. And then I might hang out, do a sectional here or there, float back to the high school for either a percussion class or perhaps maybe a band class where you're coaching or you're pulling them out for sectionals. And then, of course, after school has its schedule as well. That is the model by which Texas has produced some incredibly rich, deeply well-rounded percussion students and programs. However, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. The very sword that cuts so sharp and so deep is the one that is causing so much attrition in our state as well. And so one of the things that Strive Mind helps to do, in a book that I'm actually working on at the moment, is trying to give a bit of a counterbalanced life back to the music educator so that we can have longevity in our field. Right. And so one of the things that I'm really proud of that a handful of school districts have adopted, and this is only in the last, let's say 3, 4, 5 years, some school districts have adopted the model of, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Percussion Director, we know that you put in an inordinate amount of hours, maybe even rivaling or exceeding the head band director. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you an assistant at each middle school, or at the very least one assistant. That assistant is a paraprofessional. So I like to use the example of my good friend Mike Hustis. Do you guys know Mike?
Oh, yeah. I marched with Mike in 93.
California.
Yeah.
Right? Blue Devils. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So Mike teaches up here in a school called Prosper. And Prosper is a shining example of an excellent percussion program that Mike and the team up at Prosper have built beautifully. So when Mike leaves the high school, he floats down to middle school A, and he slaps 5 with the paraprofessional assistant number 1. How's it going? Good. We did this morning, and I worked with the 3rd middle school band and this sectional. We did this percussion ensemble, and I taught these lessons. Oh, good. And then Mike teaches the beginners, and then he slaps 5, and he goes to middle school number 2. He sees the 2nd para, gives him a high five. Hey, how's it going? Good. We did this. Da, 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 da. Mike teaches the beginner class, gives him a high five, and then goes back to the high school. At the end of the day, those two paras will more than likely assist him in the marching season as technician. Yes.
Wow. Man, Texas really has it figured out.
So that kind of system, I feel like, requires something with regards to deciding how to teach, what to teach, when, like all of that stuff. Because how is that decided? Is it global? Is it like statewide? Is it, certain areas like districts? How is it that educators can come in and out like that, and there's still that consistency, like they don't miss a beat?
Great question, George. Every single district has its own autonomy of how they want to go about teaching. Now, if we are to zoom out and we go up to the 35,000 foot view, we have something called the TEKS. The TEKS is an acronym that stands for the standards in the state by which every music educator needs to adhere to make sure that Johnny and Sally, by the time they graduate from 6th grade, they should know these fundamental things. By the end of the 7th grade, their knowledge and their skills need to be scaled up to this level. So that standard is in place for all music educators in the state of Texas. And you've probably heard of something we have in our state called UIL. Have you heard that term?
Yes.
Okay. So UIL has been the standard by which concert bands go and play on a stage for a rating for a judging panel. And then, of course, in the fall, we have our UIL process as well. Now, it's developed, of course, over the years, but it is a very, very, very strict standard. And so there's obviously pros and cons to it. And so that's a whole nother podcast, which we won't get into. But the standard of UIL has really, really paved the way for excellence to be here. However, every single district has, by and large, has a fine arts coordinator, and the fine arts coordinator touches base with the head band directors, and they make sure that the feeder patterns are in alignment. The highest performing band programs in the state of Texas, I mean, we could, between the three of us, we could just rattle off 10 or 20 that we've all heard of, the Vandegrift's and Cedar Parks and the Marcus. Yeah, Hebron, all those great programs.
Timber Creek, is that another one?
Yep. They're right here in Keller. Yes, sir. So you have all these great programs, and what you'll find is tapping on the shoulder of any 6th grader, flute player, percussionist, trombone player, their path has already been carved out in terms of their counting systems, which method books they're going to be used, which are going to be used in their homogeneous classes. And then as they get into middle school, what literature they're going to play, how many solos they're going to play in the spring, all the way up into the high school, where you realize, oh my goodness, those last 3 years, they can stand on their own in terms of enrichment and concerts and all this music. But the counting system and the methodology was actually a perfect track for us to now really ramp up. So when you watch any great marching band anywhere in the world, you can trace their excellence back to their foundation. And that's what Texas has carved out so well.
Who decided
Yeah.
that? Whose fault is this?
I was gonna ask.
How long has it been this way? Because, I mean, this is...
Is there like the superhero council that sits there and makes like, all right...
Yes. Yeah. So I can tell you the very, very general version, which to me is fascinating. And so for all the people watching this podcast, please reach out to me and correct me if I get any of this wrong, but this is the way that I understand it. Back in the 70s and the 80s, somewhere along the line, the state of Texas recognized how incredibly entertaining football is. So when I think of really strong football teams, I think of California, I think of Texas, and I think of some other states in the South maybe that have really strong football teams. My understanding is that the powers that be, aka the administrators at the top UIL level, which governs not just music, but athletics and academics and everything, and again, I'm overgeneralizing. My understanding is they thought, what can we do to bring more spectacle to our football games? And then the music administrators that were partnering with those folks, again, this is 30, 40, 50 years ago, said, I can help you with that, but we're going to need more resources. So if you want this marching band to come out at halftime and you want the crowd to stay and get excited for the second half, then we're going to need another band director. In fact, for the next 50 to 100 kids, for every that many kids that we improve and put on the field, I need you to go ahead and give us even more resources so that we can keep up competitively from what you're asking. And so the way that I like to say it, and again, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I really have always explained it this way. The brilliant people back in that era saw an opportunity to hitch their wagon onto the greater UIL train because it's strong, it's organized, there's probably a lot of resources there. And so as the popularity and success of football goes, so then did the band programs.
I was going to say, and then with like football, it's like keeping up with the Joneses. You know, you have this football team and then another one.
And for any of us that have been on tour in Texas, and been to like a Buc-ee's or two, and you go to you drive up to some of these stadiums, you're like, oh.
Yeah. Well, you talk about Prosper. I was fortunate enough to be part of the Blue Coat staff last year, and one of the audition camps was there at Prosper High School. And I remember turning the corner to just the football field alone. There's like luxury suites in the high school football field. It was like something like crazy. And then the school itself is just amazing, you know.
So this whole world is a world that you are, mid-90s, working towards engaging in. How was that transition for you coming out of schooling into actually, okay, this is going to be my livelihood. I'm going to do this for a living. What was that time of your life kind of like?
Yeah, great question, George. So that part of my life was definitely me pursuing opportunities and not settling into a percussion director job yet. So what happened was I went on tour with Phantom Regiment in 1993, had an amazing experience, learned a lot.
And you could have still marched that year, correct?
I think so. I think depending on where my birthday fell,
it was different back then. Yeah,
that was a cool year.
Yeah,
a lot of cool sounds.
A lot of experimenting with metallic sound.
Yes, good memory. Yeah, Jeff wrote the most colorful book that I think I could probably even remember to this day. Every battery section, not even talking about the pit. Every battery section had multiple implements and multiple colors mounted on our drums. So the bass drums were playing with one side was a ribbon crasher, the other side was a splash, then the right hand was a jingle stick, and then the left hand was we had one snare drummer by the name of Kevin. His dad worked at a company or had an affiliation with NASA. And so we ended up getting some really, really light aluminum, and he helped us design some light aluminum sticks so that when we did that ping shot where you lay it down like a cross stick and hit it up, it had the most pure ping, and he designed it to a certain pitch. So we play with aluminum sticks. We actually laid guts underneath the top snare head for a little extra richness and snare sound. I mean, I could go on. The quads had a cymbal disc in the middle there. They had jam blocks. It goes on and on.
I remember, and the thing you mentioned, I was specifically going to say the metal sticks. Yeah, I remember that.
But you asked. We had a very short conversation with Jeff at INE.
Yeah.
In 2019,
I
think it was, because he was there to watch his son. And he was talking about his sort of thought process that year and of like, of wood and metal and like canvas.
Well, he brought up like a percussion ensemble piece that inspired, but I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
But
we should have Jeff come on one day and talk to him.
We'd love to have Jeff on,
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
So keep going. So you were,
So Jeff wrote this really colorful book, and we had a great time teaching that summer, and it was really fun to be around the other competitive lines. There were so many good drum lines in 1993. I was actually judging last night with a good friend of mine by the name of John Merritt, and John was the section leader of the cadets in 93. And I think we may have been remembering who beat who finals night, but that's another topic for another discussion. Anyway, cadets were great. Obviously, Star of Indiana was great. I've got a million stories about kind of discovering Star of Indiana, especially walking around the corner at our first show and hearing a metronome playing in the parking lot. That was the first time I'd heard that.
Wait a minute, real quick. You said, okay, it just hit me. You're a 93 alumni of drum corps. So you endured the Jackson, Mississippi part with the rest, with us.
My jacket is still wet, Rob.
Yeah.
I feel like DCI needs to come out with a commemorative badge that says, I survived 1993 Jackson, Mississippi.
Yes.
But that's
sir.
a whole other podcast. I'm sorry for interrupting, but it just hit me.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Yeah, so you're talking about Star of
Yeah.
Indiana, and
And hearing the Met. Like
Yeah.
like, what is that?
the Met. Yeah, that was like the different for that era. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes. And the first time that many of us, definitely me, had ever heard a drumline trying to play in time with a metronome. And so all of the young guns listening to this podcast probably can't relate to this story, but here we are. We had a great warm up, and I don't remember the show. We were probably somewhere in the Midwest. We're walking to the show and I'm feeling good. I'm walking with the snare line up to the gate. And in the distance, I heard this pulse. And I thought, if I didn't know any better, that actually sounds like a metronome, like a Dr. Beat. And I mentioned it to one of the other staff members. They said, no, Jeff, you're crazy. You're hearing things. Anyway, all right, boys and girls, let's have a great show. And it got louder and louder. We turned the corner around the school. And sure enough, beep, beep, beep. Star had masking taped a Dr. Beat to a Long Ranger. And they're playing with it. And let's just say this. The talking on our staff as we walked past them got really quiet. It was outstanding. So we walked to the gate, had a good show, and I remember thinking, yeah, I think people are going to be talking about this drum line and this drum corps show for quite some time.
How great are those moments?
Yeah.
You know, like I mean,
right?
Talking about it is one thing, but actually having witnessed that,
Yes.
been there for that, where you can tell, things are going to be different now.
Yes.
Like this is new.
Yeah.
And better.
Do you guys know who Pat Fitzgerald is?
Yeah. I just saw him at the Float Memorial a couple.
Oh gosh, I wish I would have been able to make it. I heard it was very, very special. R.I.P. Tom. Pat, as you know, Blue Devil alum. Pat is one of my favorite people on planet Earth. He just is, for many, many reasons. He was our quad tech that year. So that night, I went into the stands because I'm a huge Bartok nerd. I'm a huge Barber nerd. Again, my classical roots are showing. I get it. So I was sitting next to Pat. Pat was not a fan. And Pat, if you're listening, I apologize. I'm about to throw you under the bus. He was not a fan at all. He was just kind of crossing his arms, wondering, if we're going to beat them in drums or if they're going to beat whatever. And I said, Pat, buddy, you may not like this, but this is groundbreaking. This is amazing. Even if you don't have a taste for it, we're going to be talking about this when we get older. We're not. It's a flash in the pan, that kind of a thing. So, Pat, I love you, buddy, but I think one of us may have come out on the right side of history there.
I mean, this is what I'll say. What I'll say is what I remember is Pat's opinion. What could be felt throughout.
Yes.
Like what is this? Like not even just percussion wise, but just like the whole thing. And I think that some people, now when people look at the progress and people look at how inspirational and groundbreaking that show was, they sort of put themselves in the other I loved it back then. Like I saw it back then. And then I'm like, no, you didn't. Like you were, we were, no. Yeah. Like everybody, like a lot of people were funny. like, what is this? Can I ask you a random question? Star 93, I feel like, is making a comeback with regards to like being referenced. Rhythmic Force played a version of a chunk of obviously adapting the original material, but very much in that sort of Star style. And this year, I could be mistaken, but I think it was Strike Percussion down in Florida. Also has a part that was like the piece of that music that Star played more in like the closer. But I just find that fascinating that it's interesting that there's callbacks. Even now, 20 years later,
30
anniversary,
30
years later.
Yeah.
It's 30 years later.
30.
Wow. Yeah. 3 decades, fellas.
Yeah.
Wow. By the way, if I was to guess, I would say I probably hear Medea 4 to 7 times a year in the United States in the fall.
What's the other one? Malagueña?
No, Malagueña is probably less than 3.
Really?
Yep.
It's kind of died away a little bit.
I guess so. But that's what happens when you take great music. So that was an amazing experience for me. So getting off the road, 94, 95, kind of getting back into my classical roots at North Texas, just an incredible experience there and the ensembles that I was able to play with, etc. And then being taken away from my senior semester in Nashville, my path was 100% I'm on the road or I'm in the studio for several years. I mean, I just got away. I didn't see I was too busy. I didn't go to a drum corps show. I didn't play Porgy and Bess one time. I didn't play a very soft 4-stroke rough. I didn't do any of that. I was slamming backbeats and singing the dominant on all these harmonies in live shows. That's all I did from 95 to 99 or something. So fortunately, we ended up breaking up the band on a very friendly terms. It was a big deal. Big record labels like that, it's there's a lot of red tape, and we had a 5-record deal, so getting out of it early was tough, and the finances behind it were very challenging.
So what brought you back to drum corps?
Yes, sir. So there I am in Nashville. I finished that road life, if you will, and I figured, well, I want to go to graduate school. I want to continue my studies. I want to continue to get better as a player and teacher, and I'm already in Nashville, so let me finish my degree. And so there I am in Nashville. So I go to Belmont University, like I mentioned earlier. I finished my degree there, had a great experience there. It was wonderful. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to go to an indoor drumline show. And it was there somewhere probably in the Murfreesboro era. And I didn't know Julie Dovell at that time, probably not Lalo. And I went there to the show and I said, what the heck is this indoor drumline? So I went there and I sat, and the first high school group comes out. And it was, I want to say it was the game of Clue, maybe, all these Clue characters. Well, it was Julie's group when she was a high school director there, and it was wonderful. And I was blown away, and I'm enjoying it. So I'm enjoying the production and the way they're playing. And then another group comes out, and all I remember is barbed wire being strewn across the gym.
Is this was it Carolina, whatever, the Holocaust show?
The Carolina Thunder show.
Carolina Thunder, yeah.
Yeah. And to this day, it was one of the most uncomfortable 9 minutes I've ever spent in a gymnasium. It was powerful.
I can't even imagine seeing that live just on the video,
No. Nope.
Yeah. And there's so many different opinions about that show, either like it's campy, why the heck would you do that, to like, wow, what a powerful show,
But this is interesting, the eyes that you're bringing to this based on what you had just done. And then you're coming back to it, but then there's this new sort of version of this thing that you had engaged with before. How did you make sense of it? How did you take it in?
That's a super insightful question, George. And I'm actually going to rewind to show a little bit more disparity here. So at North Texas, you guys probably know this, but one of the big things that North Texas does well is they enter PAS competitions. And so that was the big thing when I ended up. Thing. It's a very specific drumline event.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, hey, you want to see the visual effectiveness of a PAS show? That's what it is. It's just back and forth. You can't get up top. There's no real drill. You just drum really, really well. Yeah. So that was my whole background. And so at North Texas, that was a big deal for us. We worked hard, we played well, etc. Great. And then seeing indoor drumline in a gym through the lens of WGI, to your point, George, was something that I was seeing pageantry and acting and costumes. Yeah. They weren't wearing red high tops and bow ties playing flam drags at 400 beats a minute. Yeah. This is wild to me. And then to your point, Rob, the way that show made us feel emotionally was hollow. And it was really uncomfortable to appreciate it and to understand it. And then of course to applaud for it. Those were the most uncomfortable moments I've ever experienced in pageantry thus far. And you're right. The way that show was received was incredibly polarizing. I've read accounts where they burn the uniforms, and then the show designer, I think his name is Scotty Sells.
Scott Sells, yeah.
Yep. So I think Scotty vowed never to put his performers through that. But the other side of the coin was to honor Jewish legacy. And my understanding is that each of the performers actually researched a person and their family and wore that number on their chest to represent the horror of that. So there are easily two sides to that for sure. It was just very impactful for me for sure.
Yeah, it looks like it was a very impactful show. And I guess on finals night they had they was it shot the narrator, and then that was like,
Yes.
it doesn't get more shocking than that, I don't think.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Do you think we'll ever see a show like that again?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Not on that level. And if they do, then our society will react the way they're going to react. I suspect if somebody tried to do something on that level, cerebrally or aesthetically or emotionally in 2023, I think it would be received way, way differently than it was in 1990, whatever. Yeah.
So yeah, that show, I mean, kind of a groundbreaking show now if you think about it. I mean,
but then
be,
also,
yeah.
I mean, I imagine you saw the possibility of this, and this is not all that different, I imagine, than seeing like 88 Santa Clara at the time, because that was very theatrical and there was a lot of pageantry in that, beyond just marching band, right? This was something more than that. So what happened next? Did you start to engage in a program that produced ensembles for that world, or what happened?
Yeah, great question. So I ended up being inspired by that experience, but I was also going to graduate school. And so one of the things that I was really committed to was going to a graduate program that was 180 degrees different than the University of North Texas. So you can probably see kind of a theme in my life, right? So I'm always trying to go to my weaknesses. So I was looking at Eastman, Oberlin, just very, very different schools of thought. And I found a teacher that would change my life. And so his name is Fred Bugbee. And Dr. Bugbee got his master's and his doctorate from Eastman. Well, Dr. Bugbee's percussion program was at the New Mexico State University. So I flew out, and I probably looked at 5 or 6 different schools that I was auditioning for, but I clicked with Dr. Bugbee, and he is a 20th century scholar and a John Cage expert, and just brilliant. Just how he thinks about music was totally different than the way we thought about music at North Texas, and so on and so forth. And so Dr. Bugbee allowed me to really carve my niche, and then obviously take his experience. And so the whole idea of getting your master's degree in a smaller program with someone like that is an incredible opportunity to really find out who you are, and take their experience and ingest it and add it to the totality of everything that I had been through at that point. So those 2.5 years getting my master's degree at New Mexico State University with Fred Bugbee was just transformational. And so in that time, remember, I was just inspired in Nashville before I left. The whole rudimental thing was starting to come back. And so one of my responsibilities as a graduate assistant was teaching and running and writing for the marching band. And so I used the drumline students as a laboratory for some concepts that I had learned and I wanted to go further with. So the rhythmic ideas, the orchestrational ideas, some of the implied rhythms, the rhythms within rhythms, all the nested rhythms really came out in not only my arranging, but in an arranging class that I started to teach. So I always like to do this in public. If I taught you at New Mexico State from anywhere from 1999 to 2002, I apologize for what I put you through. But it was really the basis of what I use today as a composer and arranger. And so I just fell in love with rudiments all again, and started getting into arranging, started teaching arranging. And at that time, my re-entry to drum corps is when Blue Knights asked me to come up and consult with them in the front ensemble.